Welcome to a special edition of AAIS Pulse. We are here to discuss how diversity, equity, and inclusion are being looked through the lens of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, the NAIC, and the work being done. This is an important topic that we all need to learn more about. It has been part of my entire career, but I'll be first to admit that I learned something new about it to this day. Joining me in today's discussion are Chlora Lindley-Myers, Director of the Missouri Department of Commerce and Insurance. Director Lindley-Myers is Vice President of the NAIC and continues to serve on the Executive Committee and the Government Relations Leadership Committee. And Commissioner Andrew Mais of the Connecticut Insurance Department. Commissioner Mais is Secretary Treasurer of the NAIC and also serves on the Executive Committee and the Government Relations Leadership Committee, among others. Both are co-vice chairs of the NAIC Special Committee on Race and Insurance. I want to start off by getting your general thoughts on diversity and inclusion and its importance. Director Lindley-Myers, why don't we start with you?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. When we're looking at diversity and inclusion, I guess I'd like to believe that everyone deserves to be treated fairly, no matter what their race, color, gender, age, ethnicity, and so forth are. Discrimination, exclusion, whether intentional or not, isn't something that we as a society can afford to have. We can't continue to ignore it. It is out there. We need to move beyond those issues that are obvious signs of discrimination and exclusion to those that are less obvious, but just as damaging. That's why we're taking a deeper look into these issues. For example, into what current practices and barriers exist in the insurance sector and what potentially disadvantages that are occurring for people of color and those that have been historically displaced and unrepresented. So that's kind of where we're looking for right now.
Commissioner Mais, what do you think?
I absolutely agree with the director. And in a broader sense, if you look even beyond insurance, diversity is simply a fact of life. And it is a welcome fact of life, so far as I'm concerned. It would be a pretty boring place if we all had to wear the same color shirts and the same color ties because we only had one color. It's what keeps life interesting. We also know from numerous studies, Boston Consulting, my old firm, Deloitte, Harvard Business Review, diversity in a company leads to better results. So it's not just a fact, it is also morally good. I think that's something most of us can agree on. And it is financially good, economically good. All right, we've tended to look at organizations and we say, okay, why are they not more diverse? But we have to realize organizations exist to replicate themselves, just like any other organism. We're at the point now, and I think we are fortunate to be at a point where we can look and we can say, what do we need to do to make organizations more diverse? Why should organizations be more diverse? You look on the fact that as a leader of an organization, what you're trying to do, in this case for insurance, for instance, what you're trying to do is to sell the most products to the most people. How do you do that? If the people in your organization all think like you, all come from the same background, you are not going to get the diversity of ideas that you need. That's why a diverse population is important. And I think we also need to move beyond diversity into inclusion. Diversity is having a seat at the table. Inclusion is having your voice be heard. It will make us all stronger. It is a necessity in a society that is becoming increasingly more diverse. That's why we at the NAIC are focusing on this. And that's why I'm glad people are tuning into this and having this discussion.
Diversity and inclusion efforts in corporate America are not new. After so many years of committed efforts and resources, corporate America is still facing discrimination, stagnation, and disparity in the workplace. Commissioner Mais, what do you think we continue to struggle? Why do we continue to struggle and not see the progress we would like to, particularly in the higher levels of corporate America?
Let me say one thing here. It is not entirely negative, okay? We are better than we were, and I think it's important for us to recognize this. Certainly, this industry is a lot better than it was when I started, but you are absolutely correct. We are not where we should be. And it goes back to the idea that corporations, like any other organism, will replicate itself. That's what an organism does. You take a look at the Fortune 500. Up until I think it started this year, we were up 20%. We had 5 Black CEOs, and they were all male. We hadn't had a Black female CEO on a Fortune 500 company since 2016 with Xerox, and she'd been the only one. Are we seeing changes? Yes. This year alone, so far, we've had 3 Black women named to lead Fortune 500 corporations. Numbers aren't where they should be, but they're getting there. Question is, how do we get them there faster? And anybody who's listened to me knows that there are a couple of things that I think are vital. One is metrics. What doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. Okay, unless you have the metrics, unless you're paying attention to them, then everything else is just pretty talk. It's diversity theater that falls by the wayside. And the other is compensation. We all get compensated based on our results. Why should it not be the same for increasingly diversifying our organization, making it a more inclusive place, a more attractive place to customers and to the people and the next generation who want to work here? So, yeah, and from my point of view, I think we haven't paid enough attention to compensation and to metrics. Those are 2 steps that we need to take going forward to ensure that words that I think we all agree on get translated into lasting action.
Thank you. Director Lindley-Myers, what is your perspective?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with Andy on his perspective, but I look at it and I say this continues to be tough and a challenging issue, one that I think corporate America has been unsuccessfully grappling with for years. I think that in terms of the highest priority in the business world, diversity, inclusion, and equity has not been at the top of their priorities. I think that when something is your top priority, you will look at that and you will try to exert efforts to make that into fruition. And I don't think that that's what we've done. I think that we failed to take a deep look. We failed to exert and sustain efforts to make changes that are meaningful and that will continue. When the consumers that corporate America serves demands change, that moves an issue into their top priority for the company. I think that's what we're beginning to see now. Some have called it cancel culture or what have you, but I think that when we look at that, consumers of all walks of life, races, and cultures are being more deliberate in how they spend their money, what they're looking at, what it is that they buy or whom they buy from, and what they want to endorse is something that they can actually say, that's something that I want. It's not cancel culture. It's more of, this is what I want. This is what the America that I want to look like. And so I think that, looking at that is kind of where we are right now. Some of the changes that are needed will rely on first educating those who are in a leadership position. There are so many types of discrimination and exclusions to be considered. And if you've ever experienced it firsthand, you know what it looks like. It may not be obvious to others. And that's why diversifying our thought, diversifying the number of people that we have and bring to the table is important. It is crucial to us, being able to sort of kind of get out of that I want it to look just the way I look. And we don't want that. We want it to mirror what society looks like. And so I think that when we open up and have these open dialogues as we are doing today, these issues in every industry, in every area of leadership will be necessary in order to make that long-term systemic change that we're all looking for.
If I could just jump in here to echo what Director Lindley-Myers said, I think she mentioned a very important facet of this: leadership. Tone at the top matters. Here in Connecticut, as I've said, I've been very fortunate. I work for a governor who believes in equity and social justice. When he was putting together a cabinet, what he did is he went out, he got a search team, but he also said what he wants the best of us, but he recognized that looks like the rest of us. We are not going to make that implicit biased assumption that people who should be on top should only look one way. We create the future that we deserve. And what this governor did was he said, I want a cabinet that looks like Connecticut. We have the most diverse cabinet in the state's history under this governor. I'm the 33rd insurance commissioner in Connecticut. I am the first Black insurance commissioner in Connecticut. There's still states in this country that have never had a Black insurance commissioner. I can tell you that, states that you probably wouldn't believe. But I came in and was one of the first things I did. I appointed the first Latina director of the insurance department, who was also the director of inclusion. She is our chief inclusion officer. You kind of pay it forward. But it's a tone at the top that's important. And that, I think, just to echo what Chlora says, if the person at the top, the people at the top think it's important, it filters down.
And I will go back in and say, the same thing. And when Andy says, okay, he comes into this position, he's the first, African-American to be placed in this position. So was I. I was with this department in the late 90s. And frankly, other than myself and 3 other people, there weren't a lot of people that were at the department. And I was a leadership position at a, sort of a smaller area over the property and casualty area. But I do think it's important to say, hey, not everybody has to look like me, whoever I am. And so, I'm in a department that is definitely diverse, and not all of them are women. And certainly not all of them are African American. So I do think it is important that we look and seek out people. They are out there. We just have to look for diversity in conversation, in ideas, and they don't all look like me.
Let's turn our attentions to the tragic events of George Floyd and the social unrest going from last year into this year. As a result, companies have made pledges to make workplaces more diverse and a priority for 2021. While commendable, to me, it feels a bit deja vu. What's the difference this time? Dr. Lindley-Myers, let's stay with you on this, and then we'll move to Commissioner Mais.
Every year, I think I thought we were making progress. I thought we were moving towards, it wasn't perfect, but I thought, and as Andy said initially, I thought we were getting a little bit better, and we are. But I realize, that we're not there yet. We're not there where we should be after all of this time. When we're talking about the social unrest, the Cooper case in New York, you can go out and be a bird watcher, but if somebody thinks, you shouldn't be there, they'll say, well, I'm going to call the police, that an African-American man is doing this to me or whatever. And it's not true. Or take the, Philando Castile case, that Breonna Taylor, certainly George Floyd. I think, that there is some sense of progress, but for whatever reason, the progress takes on, if I think it's not right or something is going on, I'm going first to race and tout you out as some big bad bully or big bad, wolf kind of a thing. And I think that, we need to get away from that, get away from any stereotypes or thoughts, that are out there. What can be done? What can we do to be more accepting? In, this, present time, there shouldn't be, this is the first whatever, African-American, the first Latina, the first, Latino, the first Asian American, that is doing that. We as people are out there, and it's important that the rest of society sort of understand that, learn that, and understand what our ideas are and what we bring to the table. I think that I can remember 15, 20 years ago, I was working for an organization, and the organization, the person there was saying, I can't really find, any African Americans. I can't find any people of color in this environment, but we lived in a large city. What do you mean? I see these people every day walking up and down the street. So I don't quite understand that, but I think that, certainly the George Floyd, and the Philando Castile and all of these other, Breonna Taylor are bringing things, out to light that maybe wasn't looked at before or wasn't, seen. And just now society as a whole is saying, wait a minute. Yeah, I kind of see that. I kind of get that. And I, as society, needs to broaden my thought patterns. And so I think that's what these incidents have brought to the forefront. And my hope is that it propels it and keeps it going so that we become, little by little, a more well-rounded, environment and society.
I think you look through history. After the Civil War, there was Reconstruction, there's the step forward, but then there's a movement back. But you also see that moments can trigger movements. Look at Little Rock, what happened with integration there, the pictures of those little black kids going into school. Look, for instance, at the Bull Connor and his dogs. All of that work to trigger the Civil Rights Act. That gave President Johnson, after President Kennedy's death, the ability to move that legislation forward. And that did make a big difference. It didn't do everything. I would like to think we are at another inflection point. As Chlora said, it's not that these things have not been happening. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Emmett Till, how far back do you want to go? We have had more than enough martyrs. We have had more than enough mourning, okay? But it has been too easy for many people to simply turn away if it didn't affect them. And that's one thing that has changed in our culture. It used to be, I think they said it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Now it's 9 minutes, 20-something seconds of watching that man lie there with somebody's foot on their neck. Poor guy calling for his mother. He can't breathe. Nobody watching that can doubt that there does exist those examples of man's inhumanity to man. And it's not just some concept that somebody's trying to sell you. You can see it right there. And you can, if you choose, turn away, because there are those, as we have seen, there are those who have turned away. But for many people, I think it was an eye-opener. And it has certainly triggered within the business community, if you look at what's happened since, it's triggered a movement towards making a difference. It's triggered a realization that this is an emerging risk to our society that needs to be dealt with. It's triggered, I would hope, a certain feeling within us that we do need to survive as a society. We need to move towards that realization that we all are created equal. That's what I hope we will take away from this. And from what I've heard, that's what many have taken away from this. And that is why I think this will make a difference in the long run. Again, won't do everything, but we keep moving forward.
Thank you. As we move forward, as the corporate world unites to take a stronger stance against racism, we're hearing a lot about unconscious bias. In response, unconscious bias training is popping up everywhere and is viewed, and at least in part, as the answer to solving prejudice and discrimination in the workplace. So will this move the needle, or is a more comprehensible approach in order here? Let's start with Commissioner Hayes.
It's not the answer, but it is an answer. It is part of the answer. I will tell you, after I named Lady Mendoza Chief Inclusion Officer, one of the first things she did was to set up implicit bias training for the entire department. I come from an organization, I've been with the department, been back in public service for a couple of years now. Before that, I was with a Big Four firm where this was treated with everybody. It was a focus of the firm. And we went through implicit bias training repeatedly. It's not something that you do one time, I think, and done. Because it is important that we recognize our own biases for a number of reasons. One is that then you can't sit there and say, I don't have a bias, which is what some people think, because I'm not out there doing X or Y or Z, I don't have a prejudice. We've got to all sit back. We've got to realize that we have our own prejudices, and only by acknowledging them and confronting them can we hope to overcome them. And within the organization, it also creates, I guess, a certain more level playing field. So it opens the ability of people, the ability of people to talk to each other and to listen to each other and to learn from each other. I think, Director Lindley-Myers can tell you when we were starting this as regulators of the NAIC, we had our own internal discussions among the commissioners, and some of them got very raw. And by raw, I don't mean angry or hostile. That's not where I'm going. I'm saying people just sharing of themselves, sharing their experiences from all different backgrounds. And that made it so much easier for us to move forward because we had that sense of trust. We knew that we were moving towards a common goal. That's what implicit bias training can help us to do. And that's why I think it's vitally important.
Director Lindley-Myers, where do you stand?
As I know you may not know this, but at the NAIC, generally, when somebody has sort of hit every high point, and it's like, it's not very much more to add, I generally say ditto. So I'm saying ditto to Andy Mais. I mean, absolutely, he absolutely framed the issue correctly. We all have biases, but I think where this, having these trainings or what have you, it kind of opens it up and allow people to sort of hopefully let it out so that they can kind of understand where things might be wrong or whatever. It's not sometimes when it is unconscious bias, it is, I've heard this is what this goes, and I'm afraid to ask this question. If you have issues or if you have things that you want to find out, curiosity, there's nothing, you don't need to do it in a big auditorium or amphitheater. There are things, it used to be sort of the joke, and I'm putting air quotes around the word joke. It's like, well, I know what you people like or don't like. And it's like, what do you mean? You've just met me. So how can you know what I like or don't like? So I think having these types of training, get you to the granular level of knowing the person, knowing where they came from, knowing what trials they've had to overcome. And it's not particularly a bias, particularly against a race, against a culture. It starts out maybe as that, but it also gets to know the person, what they have come through and what they've had to deal with. I can truly tell you that I have never been homeless. However, it's not because we weren't really, really close to it. It's just people in the community kind of kept us going. And so that, so you don't have to have experienced it to know what it's like. You just have to actually be amenable to having the discussion to kind of know what it's like. A lot of times, people will say, a kid, you're in raising your children, they'll touch that hot stove only once, even though you've told them over and over again about doing it. But I do think that, yet you learn through experience, and a lot of us have different experiences that others haven't had. And so when we're able to sit down and have that fruitful and open conversation, I think we will not get rid of it, but we will certainly whittle down the unconscious bias.
Thank you. On the compensation side, there's senior HR executives and directors are beginning to have conversations around this being part of executive compensation. Commissioner Mais, is this a good idea, bad idea?
Yeah, I think you can tell from what I said earlier, my answer is easy. Yes, money talks, everything else is. You can say anything you want. You can come out and stand up on the steps and proclaim that you love diversity and inclusion, you're in favor of social justice and equity. But when it comes to moving an organization, there's a reason we pay people. There's a reason that we give people goals that they have to meet in order to make their incentives. This is just the same as any other. You look at the ROI, you look at your market share, your social justice metrics should be another set of metrics that you look at, because it is just as important in the long run for the survival and for the prosperity, both of the company and for the larger economy. So yeah, yes.
And Dr. Lindley-Myers, what do you think?
I knew you were going to come to me. What are we compensating people for? Their experiences, the way they are able to do the job that they have been hired to do. So absolutely, you need to make sure that people are properly compensated. And what that means is you need to have a person who has had a variety of experiences. And so what that means is that for most people of color, not everybody, but for a large number of people of color, we've had to organize ourselves or deal in a world that did not look like us. In other words, we've had to work in an environment where a lot of the people, most of the people did not look like us. They were white, but there was this whole sort of projection towards ebonics, and in that sense of trying to assimilate into someone else's culture and learn their language and understand their language. And it wasn't necessarily, just learning, Spanish or French or, some other language like that. But it was, if we understood or knew ebonics, we would better be able to assimilate with people of color. And that's not true, because we don't all come from the same place. We don't all do the same things. There are some things that are a part of hip culture or pop culture that we have to assimilate in. And it comes from everywhere. It doesn't just come from a specific demographic. So I do think, working in an environment that involves people other than yourself is something that people should be compensated for, because it is learning to deal, learning to work in an environment that may be foreign to yours. So absolutely, compensation is, as Andy says, money talks and other stuff walks. And so therefore, you need to make sure that you're bringing everything to the table, a variety of experiences. So compensation for me, compensation for you, no matter what you look like, because all of that hopefully melds into this pot, this melting pot we call America.
Let's move on to the topic of insurance and race. The NAIC has a special committee on insurance and race. For those of you not aware, this committee was formed to look at a variety of things: equal access to insurance and the growing gap that continues to emerge for people of color and historically underrepresented groups. Commissioner Mais, I have a three-part question for you. As the co-chair for the workstream on property and casualty insurance, can you tell us a bit more about it, what the commissioners have learned so far, and perhaps a hint of what we can expect to come out from those sessions from this year and beyond?
Well, there is not much I can tell you about what is coming out. I'll say that up front. But if you tune in to the NAIC spring meeting, you will see what happens. We're not, we simply are not, or I certainly simply am not at a point where I can tell you this is where we're going. That's a decision that will be made by everyone who's participating in the spring meeting, all the regulators, and that information, it will be open discussion. And please join us for that. There are a couple of things that I take away from the Committee on Race in general. One is that we have the courage, under the Director Ray Farmer, we have the courage to lead, not just sit back, not just ignore it, because that would have been easy to do. This was during a pandemic. This was not something you were going to win awards for. But Director Ray Farmer said, yes, we are going to do this. And this is going to be a multi-year commitment, because it's not something we're going to address tomorrow or in the next year. And the 56 member jurisdictions of the NAIC all went along. And as we've gone through the individual, we've got 5 work streams. One of the work streams, by the way, looks at us as regulators, what we're doing. Another looks at industry. The others look at the functional areas within the industry itself. And as you said, I co-chair the property casualty one. We've been looking at it. We've been hearing from an awful lot of stakeholders. We've been getting ideas, some of which, frankly, may not have, or at least I will speak for myself, did not occur to me until I was thinking about it. So it was an information gathering process. We did not go in, I may have a preconception that there was a concern, but we wanted the data to figure out if there really was a concern and where to go next. We wanted to make sure that what we did was not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but doing it because it was right. And that's where we are now. We gathered information and we're moved towards the next step. What data do we need in order to make changes? What kind of changes are we looking at in society? You've got a brick and mortar agency in a particular area. If you don't, does that mean you're not serving those, or you've chosen not to serve that population? What happens as everybody goes online? And if there's a technology gap, how does that affect diversity and equity? How does it affect serving and servicing underserved communities? There are a whole bunch of questions that we have to answer, and we are going to have to prioritize them because there is so much that has to be done. But it's also one of the other things I've learned is the willingness of so many stakeholders to engage. You might expect the consumer groups and the regulators, but we've also seen the industry groups make an effort, a strong effort, to become a part of a solution, not a part of the problem. And that gives me hope. So tune in to the NAIC meeting. You'll hear an awful lot. You'll see that we think there's an awful lot to do, and you will see what our next steps are. But even more importantly, I'd say join us on the journey. We need everyone to make this work.
Thank you. Director Lindley-Myers, you're also very active in the space. Can you give us your perspective, any insights you gain talking to your fellow commissioners?
Sure. It's important that the insurance industry make significant changes in response to inequities we identify through this work. And as Andy mentioned, a lot of it we're still formulating and will be during the NAIC meeting, which will be occurring next week. But I think that, we understand that this isn't the first time that this type of committee has been formed or the first time that these issues have been discussed. However, I'm hopeful that for the first time, we collectively as a group of regulators in agreement, we are in agreement that things can't stay the same and that it's reached a point of becoming an ongoing and supported priority for all of us. And I think that where we are at this particular point is we understand kind of where we are. We understand that if no matter what your race or color or creed is, if you've had 15 different accidents, hopefully the algorithms are such that it's going to discriminate. It's going to say, you need to be charged a higher premium, not because you are a member of an underrepresented or underserved community, but simply because of what you've done. We apply this across the board. And so that has to be looked at. But in looking at that, we have to understand and think whether or not you're actually offered the same products as some of the people in a different in a different ethnic group or what have you. And so all of those things have to be looked at because in a sense, insurance is discriminatory. We've got to take into account what you've done in your insurance life and whether or not that is something that, should be surcharged and charged a little bit higher premium or what have you. But that little bit higher premium is not charged because of your race or ethnicity, but charged because you have contributed to bad behaviors or behaviors that require us to charge a little bit more. And I think that, when we're talking about it, we have to understand what we have inherited. There are some things that is not of our doing per se, but it is things that what are we doing to fix those things that are not, that have, propagated itself time and time again. What are we doing now to fix that going forward?
Thank you. Yeah, there's also a similar work stream on the issues that we've been discussing today. It's diversity and inclusion in corporate America. Director Lindley-Myers, this question is for you. What's happening there, and what might we expect from that work stream?
I think we've been talking about it all along. The hope that we as society reposition our thoughts, reposition our procedures, and look at our history and try to repair some of those things looking forward. In seeking diversity in our hiring, in seeking diversity in who we collaborate with, because we don't need one set of thought going into it. We need sort of the diversity of thought and where we're going. Create policies to capture that diversity of thought and retain that as we retain people of a diverse environment going forward. So it's not just to get diversity and inclusion in the door and then just sort of leave it there. It is to try to make sure that we understand how we got it into the door, what we need to do in order to keep it, and listen to a diversity of thought and educate people on that. Again, this life is an educational you don't stay where you are. You've got to learn things and keep going and moving on towards that. And that is what I'm hoping that these work streams will do, not only for us as regulators, but us as people, that we're able to go forward and make sure that our ideas are put into place. Things that we've learned today are put into place for the future, and that we build upon that, going step by step in order to build a more inclusive and diverse population, not only in our businesses, but also in our culture and frankly, in everything that we do. You can't segment it out. It has to be something that is just a part of life. Commissioner
Mais, anything to add?
I would go ditto.
Thank you on that. Well, we're running out of time here, but before we go, do you have any final thoughts for our audience? I started with Director Lindley-Myers, so let's reverse the order here and start with Commissioner Mais and conclude with Director Lindley-Myers.
My quick thought would be race insurance, race in general, bigotry in general. It's not just an insurance problem. It's a problem for society. It's a problem we've had. It's a problem we will continue to have unless and until we choose to address it. And we will each have to address it in our own way. The NAIC's initiative on race and insurance, that committee, is one way for us to address it with an insurance. And I think what we've seen just in terms of the input from various stakeholders is a positive. But we can't, this is not, as Chlora said, a one and done. We have to keep doing this. We have to keep addressing this, and we have to keep addressing this. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It's not simply if you're Black or if you're Native American, if you're Asian person. We've seen if you're a transgender kid who's being denied medical care, we have to be against injustice everywhere. That's why we create a broader, more inclusive society. And that, I think, is how we are going to create a broader, more inclusive, more profitable, and more relevant industry. And that's, insurance to me is a great social good. I want it to be the best it can be.
We've inherited a set of demographics. How are we going to change it? That's kind of where we are right now. We need to look at how we're going to make sure that we're a more inclusive society, not only in insurance, not only as it relates to race, but just as it relates to any subset that we have determined shouldn't be there, or it should be my way or the highway. The hope is that we take the inherited demographics that we've been given and improve upon them, improve our thought process, and make sure that we understand where people are coming from. One of the things I mentioned before about, cancel culture, there's also been, this sort of language of racial ambiguity. If we are truly looking at people, we're trying to put them in a box, and people don't fit in a box. They are a there are sort of a culmination of a lot of different things, a lot of different ideas. And I think taking people for where they are, trying to educate them so that they can become better, so that we can become better, is kind of where we need to go. And not only as, for insurance, not only as for race relations, but also as people. We need to understand that we're not going to understand everything about everybody, but we need to be open to listening to what's out there and making sure that we are, we don't have to necessarily embrace it, but we have to understand where it's coming from and understand what we can do to make it better. And it may be a situation where, again, we're not going to say, hey, I believe in what you're saying and doing, and I believe in that, 100%, and that this is, kind of how we're doing. But we need to understand where that person is coming from, why they believe as they do, and hopefully have a sense of a common ground and work from that.
Thank you. Director Lindley-Myers, Commissioner Mais, thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us on this discussion.
Thank you, Will said. Thank you to the AAIS, and thank you to my fellow panelists. Always wonderful to share a panel with you, Chlora.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you for inviting me to share my ideas. Again, I think it is important that we put them out there, that, that we share them, and that we have a conversation about them. So thank you again for allowing me to be here today.
That's all we have for today's special edition of the AAIS Pulse. For more insights on insurance regulation and compliance, visit the AAIS website. This has been Balitaan for AAIS Pulse.